Hi, my name is Deon Rebello, and this is a DCX Bullion Vault. This is episode number 8. Hi, Willem, how you doing?
Good and you, Dion.
Good. So, our last episode we were discussing, at the time, it was going to be about the budget speech which was to be had that day of the episode. And we were going to use this episode to unpack the budget speech and see what are the benefits, where things fit for the person, the man in the street, and how that will ultimately affect them. But, and this was the problem, is and it was interesting you said it earlier, this that we actually do have at least a functioning democracy where things can change, which is probably one of the best things to be said from that. So there was a proposal of 17% or 2% increase in VAT, value added tax, which it would be across the board. And all the opposition parties said not a chance. And the budget speech was put on hold and subsequently has been put on hold until these issues are resolved and there's some middle ground that the government of the day can take forward to the people as a proposal on how best to get through this. Willem?
Yeah, definitely. It as you said, it is a sign that we actually do have a functioning democracy. You know, the government can't just run unopposed, do what they like anymore, and that's really good. And we can see that reflected in the strength of the rand versus the dollar. We've got Donald Trump sitting there flailing his arms, hacking away at everything to do with Africa, and everybody thought the rand was going to plummet, especially since he seems to have a particular grudge against us for some, I don't know why exactly, but he does seem to have a grudge against us for some reason. And despite everything that he's threatened to cut, everything that he's threatened to butcher, basically, the rand has remained resilient. It's remained quite stable. It hasn't plummeted like many people thought it would.
Yes, and I think what you're highlighting here is a very important thing is where we generally would have massive jumps or losses in the rand or increases in the rand. We've now seen a position where the rand has remained fairly lateral, fairly stable in quite uncertain times, especially with something of this magnitude, where literally the budget speech was put on hold and we need to sort this out. That said, and you raised the thing about Donald Trump and his not so Afro positivity about things. I do have a feeling, and I've chatted to a couple of people over the last week, and it's very clear it's based on our relationships, and not so much with China or Russia, but more with Iran. As soon as I get more information on that, we can then unpack that whole thing. But I think that is the fundamental reason why there's this anti-South African or feeling coming from the Trump administration, and I think it's very much directed from our relationship with Iran. But again, we're here to discuss South Africa, and more importantly, how this affects the man in the street.
Definitely, and an interesting little exercise or an interesting little thing that we look at is called the Big Mac Index. Now, simply put, it's quite a good gauge of the value of your currency, what your actual currency is worth in real terms. And the rand is quite an interesting one because in some instances it is extremely undervalued, and in other instances we're paying through the nose for stuff that should be a lot cheaper. But if we look at the Big Mac index, and basically what it is they take the price of a Big Mac, the hamburger from McDonald's, and they compare the price of a Big Mac in different countries and what that would cost relative to the dollar and relative to the same product in the United States. And what it came down to, interestingly enough, and the study we did actually it was done from 2020 to 2024. And in 2024, what came to light was that according to the Big Mac index, the rand is, I think it was the fourth or fifth most undervalued currency on that study. And it should be sitting closer to about 9 Rand 12 cent to the dollar. However, at that stage, I think we were sitting at around 19 Rand 12 cent to the dollar. So you can see that massive, massive discrepancy there, and just how undervalued the Rand is in some instances. While in other instances, you look at something like technology, laptops, cell phones, stuff like that, and you look at what they cost in the US or anywhere abroad, really, you look at what they cost here, and it's almost double of what they cost. And that's especially a problem when you look at the relative average salary of somebody in the US versus the relative average salary in somebody in South Africa. You buy the new iPhone in the US, it costs you $1,000. Now that's a lot of money, but if you look at what they're earning $5,000 a month on average, and to them it's not that much, but still that cell phone costs them a fifth of a monthly salary. You buy it here, you're looking at 40,000 for that same phone, and that is way above the median South African average salary. So it costs you more than a month's worth of salary to buy that same product in the US versus in South Africa.
So, Willem, on that, and what's interesting is you talk about the Rand, and if we look just over the last 10 years, so we've seen a devaluation on average to the Rand to the dollar of about 5.96% per annum. And I then went even further and I looked for the projections of where the Rand will be this year and then where it will be around 2030. What's interesting is the expectations of the Rand this year is that it will strengthen. So we will see the Rand gain in value, so dropping down into the mid 17s by the year end. That's what's proposed. But then by 2030, which is a few years down the line, we're looking at a Rand of about 23 to 25 Rand to the dollar.
The scary thing is 2030 is not that far away.
Exactly.
I mean, just the other day, it was 2020. We were in a pandemic. I mean, we all remember that as if it was yesterday. But 2030 is almost as far away as 2020 was. And but yeah, we're talking about currency devaluation. We're talking about relative values. And if we go back to the Big Mac index and we look at what's happening there, we're talking about inflation. So if we look at the price from 2020 to 2024, if we look at the price of a Big Mac in US dollars, there was a 5.6% increase. However, if we take that same Big Mac and we look at it in terms of rands, there was a 67.4% increase in the price of a Big Mac in South Africa versus 5.6% in the US. And yes, we might say inflation, we might say currency devaluation, etc., etc., but the exchange rate during that same period only increased by 38%. And that's a strong indicator of the decrease of buying power, how our money is becoming worth less, even though it's quite resilient at the moment, but it has become worth less over those 4 years. And that is such a powerful indicator of exactly how much. I mean, 38% in exchange rate versus 67.4%
in real terms.
In real terms.
And if we have to now just unpack this further, so what does that really mean? So let's unpack it to the man in the street. That means that the cost of goods has increased over that period of time exponentially. I mean, we all see it. You go to the shops, what you used to pay for basic things. I mean, we have a certain presentation we use, and we talk about inflation, and it used to show shopping bags.
And actually,
no, it showed trolleys.
It showed trolleys originally. We changed it to shopping bags.
So in the 80s, X amount of money would be 2 trolleys. And then in the 90s, it became 1 trolley. And where we are right now, it's literally, it used to be 2 shopping bags, and now it's literally 1 shopping bag. And that, what we're really highlighting here is the loss of value of your money. Literally, what it cost you, 100 Rand, what it bought you then to what it buys you now.
And the problem is, salaries aren't keeping up with this increase. If you've got an investment in a bank somewhere, that's not keeping up with it as well. It's literally, we are losing money every second of every day. We are just losing money. And unfortunately, that eventually has an impact on your quality of life. Your quality of life starts going down. You start going without this, you start cutting back on that. And that is the real danger of a currency devaluation. It happens so gradually. We're back to the frog in the pot. It happens so gradually. You don't realize that you're boiling to death until one day you wake up and you see, I can't afford to live anymore.
Yeah, and I think the world we're living in right now is also very clear on that. I mean, with the uncertainty that's coming through from the States, or globally, we look at hotspots in Europe. We see economically there are a lot of countries battling. The whole also massively within the Western world is the growth rates. People are getting older, but there's not enough young people coming through. All of these kind of things are affecting every day. You look at wars, hotspots. We look at, of course, the one in the Middle East. We look at Ukraine. And these things are all just bubbling away. We look at the performance of China economically, and they haven't been doing great, and it's been quite slow on the uptake. But then we also look at, again, we're going to go bring it, and I'm going to bring this into precious metals, is during this period of time, we've seen unprecedented levels of purchasing from reserve banks of bullion, of gold bullion, and China's been the head of that. Interesting enough, this last week, our beloved Elon Musk, Mr. Doge, for the US president, had to go and inspect the vaults at Fort Knox to inspect all the gold. And it's very clear, and what I'm starting to also pick up is there's definitely an indication of some kind of use or leveraging from gold reserves. We can see that with China. They definitely it's a plan to probably strengthen their currencies, but also to decouple the dollar in the same um, period of time.
Yeah, and I mean, if we look at gold, it's already been going absolutely crazy this year. We started off this year talking about, will it reach 3,000, and when it breaks the 2,800 barrier, then 3,000. I mean, we are so far past that. It's not even funny. Goldman Sachs recently revised their gold forecast for this year. They pushed it up to 3,100, and they added that should the economic uncertainty or economic policy uncertainty remain, it might go up to 3,300. And that's the thing, that's what gold is. It's a safe haven. As soon as trouble hits, as soon as things become uncertain, people flock to gold. And you can see that now with the threat of tariffs again in the US. There's been so many people in the US that have just taken up buying gold, trying desperately to get in there before these tariffs hit. And that it's all of this demand that's just driving the bulls and pushing gold higher and higher all the time.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention the Goldman Sachs article because to me it's quite I always say, and we talk about the model, what's it, the Minsky
The Minsky-Kindelberger
yeah,
model. Yeah.
model of booms and busts. And there's always that phase where you get institutional awareness, where you get public awareness, and in that phase is when generally that whatever the cycle we're talking about tends to go more parabolic, where there's a actual quite sharp increase in its actual value. And when you get in the likes of a Goldman Sachs, which is one of the mainstream financial institutions in the world, and they already saying they're seeing the dollar, the gold at over $3,000 before year end. At the current rate, I mean, it's just under 2,950 dollars an ounce right now as we speak. So to get to those levels, I mean, it's amazing. 6 weeks ago, I would have said, oh, we still got a bit of time to go here. But 3,200, 3,300 by year end is not impossible now.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, we were looking at when it's going to break 2,800. And it happened, I think, a week later. And then we were looking, oh, is it going to break 2000? And it shot past 2,900. And yeah, we now we're just waiting for 3,000. And as I said, the earlier it breaks the 2,800, the earlier it's going to hit 3,000. And it looks like it's going to hit it a lot earlier than I anticipated.
Yeah, I think if you see how much gold has grown just over the last 12 weeks, and interesting enough, we constantly looking at gold evaluations for clients and things like that. So we constantly having to review the pricing, also look at the current projections and the growth to make sure that, oh, is this a good time to be buying or selling? Personally, I would hold on to it. And I actually said to a client the other day that if you got any rand-based investments, sell those and buy gold. And I'm firstly need to make this very clear. I'm not a authorized financial person that can give you financial advice. And it was a bit of tongue in cheek, but there's also a seriousness behind what I'm actually saying, that there must be this awareness that gold is an unbelievable vehicle to manage losses in the rand, losses in increasing inflation, which is loss in monetary value of actual purchasing power, and then also the actual price and the growth of the commodity itself.
A big thing we always talk about and always mention is we speak about wealth. We don't speak about money. You might have R1 million today, and I think we've already shown that with the Argentinian study that we did earlier. R1 million today, it could change in the blink of an eye. R1 million in the bank, R1 million in cash is not wealth. Gold is wealth. And preserving your wealth, you need something like gold, something that is geo-neutral, something that is not going to lose value as soon as, sanctions hit, as soon as monetary policy changes or anything like that. And that is what gold is. It's geo-neutral. It carries a value across the entire world, and that value is stable across the world.
So just on that, and what's interesting is I was reading an article where they looking to have gold, the projection for the end of this decade, it's about $7,000 an ounce. Now, 2 years ago, they were saying five on a very, world that's unsettled and in a position that we currently are in. They were saying five would be max, quite a massive jump. We were talking about doubling the price, if not even more at that time. Now we're looking at people coming out, companies, institutions saying 7,000, 10,000. Um, Again, there's talk of Russia creating a gold standard, or China, or the US. I mean, I had a client who's quite an interesting man, and he had taken all the gold ounces that are currently in Fort Knox, and they valued, I think right now, I think $40 an ounce, and then he did the maths. But if you just apply the natural price of gold where it is now, it literally would wipe out the US's debt in one fell swoop.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I won't pretend to understand the entire global scene and the entire global debt. Um, but as you say, yes, things that is the value of gold. And if we look at the price of gold, where it's going, and you mentioned the Kindle-Bergaminsky model earlier, and I think just a great illustration of that is actually Bitcoin. You know, we remember, and the first phase is the early investor phase of this model, is the early investor phase. And we saw, if you look at Bitcoin, it was worth a cent or something absolutely insane like that. And there were these few people who were like, I'll put $1 in, and they bought 100 Bitcoin or something. I mean, I think the first transaction with Bitcoin was a pizza for something ridiculous like 1,500 Bitcoin or something like that. It was insane to think about it now. But that's the early investor phase. That's your angel investors. That's the people who take a massive risk on something that they're uncertain of. And then it becomes the institutional awareness, as you said, and that's where your Goldman Sachs, your World Bank, your centralized government banks come in, and that's your early investors. And then things start to pick up, And then we enter the public or the mania phase. And that's where Bitcoin shot up to $20,000 a Bitcoin. And they're like, I'm not saying gold is going to do exactly the same, but I do think we're sort of approaching that mania phase now.
Well, you just need to look at the US. Currently, and I read an article where they literally flying gold from the UK, from London to the US to New York on commercial flights right now, because the US cannot actually keep up with the demand for gold, and you know that just needs to start washing into the public. And the public, I've always said this, is if you look at the American and the European markets, they're very mature from a coin collecting or coin or bullion purchasing perspective. You know, in South Africa, it's still very open in a lot of developing countries, and we're looking at this in a number of other countries where purchasing of bullion is so far-fetched. Like, why would you want to do that? Yet in mature economies, it's quite a normal thing. In fact, the American government actually promotes, as far as tax rebates and that, for people to be owning physical gold. But again, I mean, the lessons learned are very clear that there is this vehicle for wealth management, and it's quite easy and simple, that there's many ways to do it, and there are many people offering various services on it. And again, you know, part of this is to just inform people that they do always have a choice, that we don't need to be relying on rand-based investments or local based investments, that there are options that are available to people that make sense on the global scale.
Definitely. And I mean, I remember when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, a young lad looking at gold and thinking, wow, I wish I could afford it. The truth is, right now, bullion has never been more accessible. There are so many things, so many ways that you can buy bullion, that you can start investing in bullion. You don't need R1 million to put down and say, I want to buy gold. You don't even need 60,000 rand to buy an ounce of gold. You can literally, from 500 rand a month, you can start investing in gold. And that's the beauty of technology, of awareness, and the demand that has been created for this, that there are products like that available now. And I wish it was there when I wanted it to be there.
No, absolutely. And for me, that's also something, is you have fractional ownership. You have that ability to own pieces, be it a fraction or a gram and so on. And I mean, there are many reputable companies that do offer these services in our country and pretty much throughout the world. And it is actually quite a big trend, because even globally, like I mentioned, the American market, and this is also part of what I was leading up to in that other scenario, is we know that there's this massive demand for gold in the States, but also on the retail side, the man in the street, there's a massive demand to start accruing and holding gold, because they are concerned. And again, we've actually spoken about this, is there at some point, if you look at the performance of the equity markets, there has to be something that's got to give. There's got to be some form of a correction, a recession or depression on the cards. Considering where the world is geopolitically, that also adds to that argument. At some point, things need to be reset.
And that speaks to, I think it's the fourth stage of the Minsky-Kindleberger model, which is the bust, or the correction, where, people go absolutely bananas. There's the hype, there's the mania phase, and then there's the correction after that. And the problem is, usually people wait too long. They get to the peak of the mania phase, they put their money in, and then the bust hits. And that's when people lose money. That's where people lost millions, if not in some cases everything they own on Bitcoin. Is they put all their money in there, and they bought at the peak, and then the bust hits. And well, then you've got a bit of a problem, because not everybody can afford to wait for that to recover. But that's the beautiful thing about gold, is gold will recover. There's no doubt about it. It will recover, and you will make a profit. You just need to be patient.
Well, again, I always talk about it. If you see the chart on gold, it's been moving like that. If you see the chart on any fiat currency, it moves like that. So it's a loss in actual power. But what $100 or 100 rand or 100 pesos or 100 pounds cost you or bought you 10, 20, 30 years ago, what it will buy you now, it's complete loss in actual buying power. And again, in that same scenario, as you mentioned Bitcoin, but even think about if you are holding gold now, and I had a client again saying to me, he's accrued a lovely amount of gold that he's currently holding, and it's actually really holding great value right now. And he spoke about this being for his children, and that the one needs financial assistance, and maybe you should help and liquidate some of it. And my first response is that should be that child's nest egg when they at a point of retiring, because then we're looking at probably a 10, maybe 15, 20 year life cycle still to go. And where gold is right now, what it's valued at, to what it will be valued at then you also look at the other side of it, is what the exchange rate, what's the dollar will be worth, what will the rand be worth over that same period of time. And then suddenly that actual value is that much more. It's exponential in its growth.
And I think you hit something on the head there. Creating wealth is different than having money or being rich. Wealth you can money you can lose in an instant. Wealth lasts. Wealth is for your children. Wealth is for your grandchildren, and that's what bullion creates. It's that wealth that will last for generations. And I mean, that's our slogan: creating generational wealth. And that is what bullion does. You could have R1 million in the bank, and you can leave that child R1 million, and when he turns 50 or 60, he's going to realize, well, that's not a lot of money.
Exactly.
Well, if you buy R1 million worth of gold now and you put that there, and when he turns 50 or 60, he takes that R1 million worth of gold that you bought, and he looks at it, that's going to be worth something.
Okay, so I think Willem, just to tie back to the beginning of this, we were going to talk about the South African budget speech. I think probably in the next episode, it still hasn't been confirmed as to when we will have that officially. From what I gather, it might be mid-March, that we will have that. So we will revisit this topic in a next episode. But again, I mean, we're looking at a couple of things, and I definitely want to look to maybe create some links for the member, for the person watching this, and definitely link up the Big Mac index just so people can see that and understand it. And then also that article from Goldman and Sachs. I mean, I think it's really, really powerful. I saw another one from the LBMA where they talk about gold's growth by 2030 for $7,000 an ounce. I mean, those are things that we want people to be aware of. And we're going to start to also put that information out there that people can access it. And again, I know you're going to say it, what do people need to do if they want to carry on following us?
If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, and if you want to see more, be sure to subscribe. And then we'll see you guys in the next video.
Thanks. Take care.